Everybody, happy day 2. Welcome to the UPMC Bruni Sports Complex. I'm Missy Matthews with Mike Prisuta, and the Steelers with pick number 51 overall. They take center Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. And the good news is there was a lot of movement happening, a lot of trading up to start the second round, and the Steelers didn't move at all. And they got an offensive lineman yesterday and a center today.
Missy, as Paul Harvey used to say, and now the rest of the story. If you don't know who Paul Harvey is, kids, Google it. But a little background context. I write an online column for Pittsburgh Magazine here in Pittsburgh, if you're watching us from out of market. And my thesis this week was, don't get greedy. You need a tackle and a center, but you need the center more than you need the tackle. So take the center and make sure you square that away. And if you get the tackle in the second round, great. If you don't, you live with what you have. Well, Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, and the Steelers weren't having none of that. And, man, did they navigate this draft again. They not only get an elite top 10 overall player, caliber prospect in Troy Fautanu, but they get one of the 3 best centers available according to just about every draft analyst that I studied and bothered to read prior to this process. Zach Frazier from West Virginia. And as you mentioned, no draft capital given up to move. Did every pick change hands in that second round or just most of them?
It felt like almost every single one, just, thinking what is going to happen next? Where is the center run going to start? And I think once JPJ went off, that's when we were sitting here going, oh no, who else could possibly need a center? What's going to happen here as well? But for a West Virginia guy who stayed local to go to college, being able to drive here, just like last year, Joey Porter Jr. Just drove from their house in the North Hills to be able to come down to the Steelers practice facility to see everybody. But again, continuing with our trend of pre-draft visitors, Zach Frazier, of course, he's local, so he didn't technically count against the 30, but he was one of the 5 local guys that came here to meet with the Steelers brass to get that extra information gathering process that we see so many times.
Yeah, and he was one of the big 3, if you will, at the position, like that little Tomlinism, if you will, that I worked in. The guy from Duke, Graham Barton, went shortly after the Steelers made their first round selection, so he was unavailable. And then Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon went to Vegas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 picks before the Steelers in the 7th round. So once again, they were waiting, watching the clock. Maybe the nerves were getting a little tight, but all's well that ends well. They still have their 2 third-round picks, their 4th rounder, and their 2 6th-round picks, and they get a center who I believe has a very good chance to be plug and play. There is not an incumbent at the position, and he is rated very highly, maybe 3rd to Barton and JPJ, but nonetheless a highly rated player at the position. This is from Jordan Reed of ESPN.com. Frazier, arguably the toughest of the center group, and I'll get to that in a minute. He allowed just 1 sack over the last 2 seasons, according to Jordan Reed, and he projects as a starter once fully healthy. Now, what's wrong with him, you might ask? This is where we get to the toughness part, Missy. In the last regular season against Baylor, Zach Frazier suffered a broken leg. And West Virginia was trying to drive for the winning touchdown, didn't have any timeouts, so he dragged himself off the field so his team would not get a 10-second runoff and risk winning the game. This is how he described what took place right about that moment. I started screaming. I knew I wasn't going to be able to run another play. I knew I had to get off the field. It's still a 2-minute situation. You don't want that 10-second runoff. I just kind of rolled over and didn't want to put any weight on that leg because it wasn't feeling great. I was like screaming and like bear crawling off the field. The ref was yelling at me to get down. So then I kind of hurried up and got off. West Virginia won the game with 23 seconds left.
Needed those 10 seconds that could have been gone.
And this is a guy who's going to the NFL. They had an okay season. They weren't playing for the national championship.
Right.
That game meant everything to him, that last shot at winning. I think that's a phenomenal story, and I think it's a great reveal into the character of Zach Frazier. I'm sure whoever talks for the Steelers in a few minutes will bring that up, but not the kind of thing you see every day, Missy.
No, and we will hear from one of the Steelers assistant coaches at some point to talk about this pick, number 51 overall, Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. Right now, he's currently doing a little phone call with the Steelers media. Seemed like he was pretty on point, ready to go to talk to them. And as we said, we'll take you upstairs for the live press conference of whatever coach will get a chance to hear and to break this down. And I know we mentioned it briefly yesterday when we were talking about Troy, but the wrestling background that he has, especially at that center position, something that we saw so much last year with Keanu Benton and how he felt that helped him work his football craft as well. So. He has the genetics of the athletes in his family on both his dad's side, his mom's sides, where all the wrestlers come from. And it just seems like this is a perfect fit for the Steelers, who made it very clear early in this offseason, well before they had to, cutting Mason Cole, not signing somebody throughout free agency. It just felt like all the big names of available centers kept going off of the free agency board. We get to this point, and on Monday, Coach Tomlin said that he didn't feel like they were overly thirsty in terms of a need for these teams, but there were indeed needs. The two that I think we would all say were pretty high priorities. They were able to check those boxes on day 1 and 2. And as you mentioned, 2 more picks to go today. So we're not done just yet.
I don't know about you, but I was getting downright dehydrated looking at this center position. Not anymore. This is the shot in the beer you want to finish off a very successful day. And it is just getting started, as you mentioned, because a couple more picks to come. The toughness was evident in that limp off the field story, but as you watch the blocking here and his ability to execute every type of block you need to get out into space, to get to the second level. If people out there follow Brian Baldinger, former NFL offensive lineman who now works for the NFL Network and does some announcing, he sends out lineman tweets. And Zach Frazier,
they are great.
Zach Frazier's tape has gotten Brian Baldinger's attention, particularly the strength, the way he can lock on with his hands. Daniel Jeremiah talked about that in his write-up. Jeremiah had Frazier as his number 35 player in his top 50. Steelers got him at 51. In the run game, he locks on with strong hands, rolls his hips, and uproots defenders. Quick to the second level and adjusts well in space. In the passing game, quote, firm base and immediately anchors. And then there's the toughness, the bulldog, as Jeremiah references it. He's also a pretty smart player. His coach at West Virginia, Neil Brown, was asked about him after West Virginia beat Virginia Tech this year, Missy. And according to Neil Brown, Zach Frazier was, quote, perfect assignment-wise and almost had double-digit knockdowns. So he's a guy that when he's at his best, he plays with great aggression, but he plays in control and with great execution.
Yeah, sometimes if you don't play in control, that leads to penalties and things that need to be cleaned up, especially once you take the next step heading to the NFL. Another thing to mention, the Steelers' assistant offensive line coach, Isaac Williams, very hands-on in terms of dealing with these O-line prospects throughout the entire offseason process. They sent him down to the Senior Bowl. He was able to be around them, and he even said that that was something where they're doing live reps. There's game play. It's different than the combine. It's different than their pro day. And that was a different way to look at them and to gather information about these guys. Also went to the Big 12 Media Day where Zach Frazier, of course, was. So they have been closely following him. It's something they did last year with Grady Brown. We saw that translate to Joey Porter Jr. being drafted. And it's also a great opportunity for those assistant coaches as well.
Yeah, and that Senior Bowl was another area where Frazier shined. He was still getting over the leg,
right,
but he showed up and he went down there and he talked to teams and he was on the field watching. And then at the combine, he didn't run, but he did some things. And he was still recovering. He's showing people his toughness and his competitive desire. Then you mentioned the Big 12 Pro Day where things really came together for him. I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around the Steelers getting the quality of tackle they got on the first round and then the center that I think they needed. We'll see what the staff has to say about how quickly he'll play. But again, hard not to appreciate the way that the front office has been able to navigate the nuances of this draft and understand how it's going to fall and who's going to pick what. Bravo.
A lot of patience. Interested to see what Omar Khan looks like after this one. But we're going to head upstairs now. Offensive coordinator Arthur Smith is speaking to the media.
You find a guy with that kind of pedigree and his resume and the amount of snaps he has in college. Certainly his background in wrestling. He's been a high achiever his whole life, and we couldn't be more fired up to get Zach in the building.
Well, when you took this job, how important is it to you as a former offensive line coach to build up this line?
Well, I was just excited to opportunity to get here to Pittsburgh, and it's just, any great team I've been around, it's always going to start up front. There's obviously so many important pieces, but when you want to play a certain brand of football, the Steelers brand of football, it certainly helps to have the right guys.
Arthur, to get a tackle like you got with Troy and then be able to come back right away and get a center, which was a big pull there. I mean, how significant, how important is that for Ryan?
It's just, sometimes in the draft, there are a lot of great players, and, selfishly, certainly, things break your way, and they feel like that. Obviously, last night and today, or tonight, but just really excited to get a chance to work with both of them. And, even Broderick, still early in his career as well. There's a lot of guys, Isaac, all these linemen, Dan, I'm really fired up to get a chance to work with.
Building off of that, how much of what is going through your head right now is, hey, draft one on the job, and my line is first rounder last year, first and second rounder this year. We've got a lot of talent, but at the same time, wow, that's young. I mean, there's a lot of youth I'm going to have to work with a new system and a new team.
Yeah, but I'm excited about it. I've been fortunate enough to coach a lot of great young players in previous stops, and these guys have a lot of experience. Both Zach and Troy have. They played a lot of snaps. They're not that green, and there's always a learning curve getting into the National Football League. But and there's a lot of guys that have been here, and it'll sort itself out. But it's certainly appreciate the investment, and they're all really top-end players in their own right, and that's our job to help them reach their potential and really the chemistry with the entire line and how they fit.
What is it about the makeup and the demeanor and the attitude of these two guys that you guys have drafted in the line the first two rounds? What is it about their attitude that you like or that makes them the right fit for the Steelers?
Well, I think the consistency. They played a lot of snaps at a high level, and they're not up and down players. They're truly two really physical players, play with high effort, high football IQ. So they check a lot of boxes for us.
Arthur, looking at your resume and tape, we can get a sense of what you want to do. But in your own words, how would you describe the identity and the philosophy of the offense you hope to install here?
Well, there's a certain style of play and intent we want. That fits this team and the history here, the Steelers, and the brand of football, and that shared vision. But every team I've been on, you want to have that. You want to win the line of scrimmage, but there's also you're going to adapt to the strength of your team, and that's a lot of times that's coach speak. But I would like to argue that I've done that at every stop I've been to. You try to play through the strengths of your team, but you certainly want to have if you want to have a physical team and play with an edge, you need those guys up front.
Do you think you have that now? Do you have that type of mentality, that type of players?
Certainly well on our way. It certainly feels that way. I'm really excited, and excited about a lot of the players that were already here on the roster that I've gotten to know the last couple of weeks, and just really excited how it plays out in camp, competition, everything.
Projecting a long way down the road maybe, but is there value in a group of young offensive linemen being together, growing up together 4, 5, 6, being together? The Steelers had that about a decade ago. They drafted a bunch of linemen. They played together 5, 6, 7 years together. Is there value in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that chemistry and fit, and those guys, some of those guys that grow together, you want to make sure, you'd love everybody to play every snap and to stay healthy, but you continue to develop, the back end of the roster always, and the consistency, that definitely helps.
Anybody have anything about Zach or Troy?
Arthur, Zach suffered a pretty serious leg injury in the final game of West Virginia season last year. Is there any lingering concerns with that leg, and what was that medical vetting process like for you guys?
Well, that's certainly something I would, defer to Mike and Omar. Obviously, we feel very confident in the player, selecting him here, and certainly his resume and his background. And like I said, I couldn't be more excited.
Did you take anything away from him kind of crawling himself off the field after he did that? That was a pretty tough moment.
That's who he is, and that's who his resume is. It wasn't trying to just do some dramatic shot for the camera. I mean, that's his history and his body of work. One of the tougher guys I've seen on film. It reminds me a lot of Ben Jones. I mean, it's a real toughness to him.
Arthur, both these guys have experience playing a second sport. Troy playing volleyball and Zach wrestling. When you see that in an offensive lineman, does that make you stop, maybe look a little bit more? Does it say anything about their athleticism or the way they move?
I think it's awesome to see. You know, I think, not to get on the soapbox here, but I think a lot of times you see a lot of specialization going on in youth sports, and I think it helps when you have a diverse background, different skill player, but it just, a guy like A.J. Brown was a phenomenal baseball player, could track the ball as a center fielder. I think it helps. I think it helps to have well-rounded. I was shocked to see Troy. I didn't know that. I thought they may have had a weight limit in volleyball. It was pretty impressive, but it certainly helps. You see it.
Does Troy remind you of anybody you've had over the years? I know you mentioned Ben Jones or Zach.
Well, yeah, it was more Ben Jones' style of play, and sometimes I stay away from comps. I think, again, Zach, he's got his strengths in his own right. Troy is just unique. His power, the initial quicks off the ball, those are all very impressive.
Arthur, you alluded to Zach Frazier being a high achiever. One of those things was in the classroom. He was really high GPA. How do you feel like his intelligence will help with some of the responsibilities that come with that center position?
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience, pulling the ball, making calls. There's obviously going to be adjustment to the National Football League, but that experience really helps. I guess when he was in here, he was telling me he's also does a lot of woodworking, builds things, and just that resume is impressive. He's a very, very mature person for that age coming in here, and that helps. So that's why we want him to play center.
When Troy was here earlier today, he was talking about how he liked to go on YouTube and learn things, how to cut hair, play piano, things like that. Sounds like he's similar to Zach, that they like to have hobbies outside of football. Just what does that add to have a guy that has so many other interests in addition to being a great football player?
That's kind of what you want. I mean, I think it's good. You always want to be curious. You want to be, constantly learning. You're never going to know it all. I mean, I try to challenge myself that way. It is funny. That's become normalized. Learning on YouTube. I have an 11-year-old that learns how to code and video game, I guess, cheats on YouTube. But it just shows their overall makeup. And that's another reason we're excited to have both of them.
Arthur, with the guys you had with Troy and Zach, and you guys have a lot of guys that are really good pullers. How does that kind of help your run scheme in setting that tone up front?
Well, yeah, when those guys are really comfortable playing in space, there's certain things you want to add. I mean, you don't want to get stale. You're not just going to reprint a playbook from a year before or 4 years ago. Like I said, there's a certain intent we want to play, but you want to evolve too. And play to the strengths, and it can certainly be up front. We're not going to get stale. There's going to be schemes you add every year, the wrinkles. I mean, we're going to have our, core philosophy, but you have to stay at the top of that. The game changes, and depending on personnel. So that you're excited about that versatility for sure.
As excited as you are, I'm sure, to get Troy in the first round and get a first-round tackle, was it tough to leave those centers, including Zach, the good ones on the board, where you're kind of sweating it out in the second round, like seeing picks go by and hoping that he was still going to be there at 51?
I know the last couple of years, I mean, there's things that are in your control and out of your control. You're just excited when it breaks your way. Like I said, there's a lot of great players in this draft, and obviously Mike and Omar and Mr. Rooney, they're the ones that have to make those decisions. And I think I have a more appreciation now than been in that role before. I feel fortunate, like I said, selfishly as the OC, that we were able to get both Troy and Zach.
Two more. As you looked at the tape, what jumped out on each one of those two players?
The consistency and, the intent that they play with. They both play with an edge. I think they're very smart players, but that consistency, you don't see a lot of lulls in their game, and that's a credit to both of them in the way they worked and they trained.
They both have 30-plus, 40-plus college starts, especially at that offensive line. Is that value? Is that something that you, over your years, known that they can, players like that, college experienced players, can step in a little easier?
Yeah, like I said, I'm really impressed with their body of work. It's the old adage, you're looking at the whole body of work, or you're looking at just the SAT test. That sometimes you get caught, in the recency or the guys running the 40s or the shuttles, but you go back to the tape, and both those guys, it's impressive, their body of work.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, welcome back to the studio. That was Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith talking about center Zach Frazier, who the Steelers picked up in the second round, number 51 overall pick. Also talked about Troy from last night getting Your first start here with the Steelers is the OC, 2 offensive linemen. The only other time in Steelers history they've gone rounds 1 and 2 with O-line was 2012, Dave DeCastro and Mike Adams. So really helping bulk up, and something he wants to do is run the ball, and you're getting some guys to help you do that.
Yeah, Arthur Smith talking there, Missy. Not as dramatic as Omar Khan last night when he was talking about the pick before the first selection by the Steelers. They kind of had to sweat this one out. There was one center left on the board of the top 3. It was Frazier. Arthur Smith just mentioning he's happy it broke the way they wanted it to break. But once again, I'm very impressed with the organization's ability to play chicken, if you will.
Essentially what you are doing.
Facing the draft down and not veering. I mentioned to you that at the outset of this whole process, I was of a mind, take the center, and then if you get the tackle, great. If you don't. Today, before we started here today, I was getting out my trade value chart and trying to figure out what it would cost to trade up so you could get one of these centers. And lo and behold, they got the center without having to trade up and still have all their draft capital. And boy, it looks like that line's locked and loaded. And you heard Arthur Smith asked about the limp off the field against Baylor story. You know, that's kind of legendary. I imagine to WVU that's similar to Byron Leftwich being carried down the field by his Marshall teammates when he had the ankle injury and they were trying to win the game. But to hear Arthur Smith talk about how physical these guys are and how consistent they are, and he's talking about both the first-round pick, Troy Fautanu, and also Zach Frazier. Intent, edge, smart players, body of work, no lulls. They know what they're getting. That's why they went out and got it.
Yeah, you talked a lot about just the different things that they do as well outside of football. Joked, Troy said he played volleyball, which is something he picked up because his sister played. And Arthur Smith said he thought there was a weight limit for volleyball, but just speaks to the kind of athlete that he is. And for Zach,
jumping, explosion, lateral movement.
Yeah, it's intense. And then you go with Zach Frazier in the wrestling. I mean, his high school wrestling record, 159-2.
Maybe they should draft who beat him next round.
But yeah, very interesting. As we said, we're just getting things started here from the UPMC Rooney Sports
Complex.
Complex.
Both of these guys and didn't give up anything.
I don't think we're going to be able to let that sink in until the end of the draft, and I think it's still going to be crazy that we're able to say that.
So far, so good.
And, they said you never trade away from a good player. That's kind of how I feel like they were thinking last night when they saw Troy fall to number 20. And then here, as you said, chicken is a great way. Don't cross the road.
By the way, kids, don't try that at home. It's a bad idea. But
if anything, Mike,
who's going to blink, right?
Right.
And they didn't blink.
All right, well, 2 more picks to go tonight in the 3rd round. We'll be bringing you more live coverage of those, so stay tuned for that and have a great night. We'll see everybody in just a little bit.